Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Carol Eimers. Carol is the Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for the Tennessee Valley Authority. Carol, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we get into your amazing career path from Grangeville, Idaho to TVA, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Oh, black, strong coffee and about 2 cups, and that's my limit.
Highly caffeinated?
Highly caffeinated.
Do you have a preference on brand?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a coffee snob, I have to admit. So at home, it is Starbucks, but around town, I have a few of my favorites that I like to hit. But as long as it's strong, I'm in.
Do you want to say who those favorites are? You want to keep people guessing?
Oh, they can keep guessing.
And do you do a drip or a Keurig or a?
Oh, I do drip.
Do you?
Yep. It's got to be pure.
You know, we were doing a drip, and Susie bought a Nespresso machine, and I'm like, oh, that's a waste. And I'm sold.
Are you?
You know, I went from trying to finish a pot of drip coffee to 2 Nespressos. Do me just great.
Well, that would do you great. I have to say espressos are, for someone who likes strong coffee, they're a little bit strong for me.
They are strong, you're right. And now, and this isn't so much a dirty little secret anymore, I'm a decaf guy, believe it or not.
Yeah, I haven't gone that far.
Yeah, I gave up the caffeine 5-6 years ago. Figured I had enough. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Me too. I'm looking forward to this.
And I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the last year and a half, 2 years, and glad you're in Chattanooga.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here too. It's been I moved here in 2016, and best move I've made. Love it.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And what I didn't realize the first time we met, because you really don't throw off that Midwest vibe. You're from Idaho.
I'm from Idaho, and actually...
and that's really not Midwest. That's far west.
That's far west, exactly. Go west, young man, is what I like to say. Born and raised in Idaho, small rural community. My family owned a John Deere dealership.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Grew up on a ranch about 6 miles outside of town, but loved it. Wouldn't trade my childhood for anything. So John Deere dealership. I grew up, my dad had a materials handling dealership that my brothers still run in Memphis. So kind of know that world. Yep. It is one of those where it's, if I wasn't doing a sport, I was usually down at Brown Motors, which was the name of our family store, sitting on a stool listening to Dad talk to all the farmers that came into town. So.
And you're the youngest of how many siblings?
I'm the youngest of 4.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I still have a couple that live out in Idaho, and then I have a sister that's in Knoxville. My mom actually moved out here several years ago, so she's just a couple houses down. Lost her dad several years ago.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, no, thank you. But love Chattanooga, great move, but miss Idaho, particularly in the summers.
Well, and growing up in Idaho, I've never been out there. So in my mind, I've got this image. What's a kid do in Idaho? Because it's rural, are you just hanging out with each other? How did you stay active?
Well, we had a lot of friends in town, obviously.
Yeah.
But we also, we grew up in an age where we had 1,500 acres. So our parents were go outside and find something to do.
Get out of the house.
Just get out of the house. So we had a 1,500-acre playground.
Oh, nice.
That we could roam around on, that had creeks. We had horses. So if we weren't in town playing with our friends, we were finding something to do outside.
And what was the thing you enjoyed doing most? If you had a 1,500-acre playground, were you hunting? Were you camping? Were you doing all the above?
Yeah, my favorite thing to do was get on my horse and take off for a couple hours.
What's your horse's name?
Well, I had a couple different ones over the years, but Jesse was the last one that I had. But that was probably my favorite thing to do when I was home. I like alone time. And so for me, hopping on the back of a horse and taking off for a couple hours, that's probably one thing I miss the most from childhood, is not having that freedom to just walk down the driveway and saddle up my horse.
Did you ride competitively at all?
Well, loosely competitively. So I did do barrel racing.
Did you?
I did, but certainly not on the level that a lot of people do it. My dad was actually a team roper. So my dad, when he was a young child, or well, I shouldn't say child, when my dad was a young man between the ages of 19 and 21, was on the pro rodeo circuit.
Really?
Yeah. So
that's very cool. I love the rodeo.
Yeah. And he did bareback and bull riding, and later on in his life got into team roping. So we had an arena on our ranch, and so a lot of times on weekends we would have team roping competitions, and so I would participate a little bit in that.
Yeah.
But anything around the horses and the farm or the ranch is what I really enjoyed doing.
That had to teach you a lot of discipline, because I would imagine also with your dad not only running a John Deere dealership but having the ranch, that you had a lot of chores around that.
Oh yeah, it was, and we also ran cattle. So, it wasn't. We didn't have the life of Riley. It was sometimes getting racked out of bed at 2 a.m. to go help birth a calf, picking rock, building fence, herding cattle. Yeah,
it wasn't the life of leisure though.
No.
Well, that established a work ethic.
It did. Sitting still is not something I do well.
No. So as a kid growing up, what were some of your high school activities, and were you working high school jobs or mainly at the dealership?
Yeah, so during the school year, when I was going through high school, basketball, and we finally got volleyball my junior year. Basketball and track tennis were probably the main sports you could participate in, so I participated in every sport except track. Mm-hmm. And then I was also on the debate team.
And I've talked to a number of people on the debate who did debate, and it's not nearly as big in the South as it is particularly in the Northeast and maybe even out West. What did you get from debate? Because I think there's a lot of value in there that people don't realize when they're 14, 15, 16.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons to be learned when you go through debate, but probably the biggest one is you really learn to look at all sides of an issue.
Yeah.
And understand the sides of the issue, because when you're debating, one time you're debating the pro side of it, the issue, the next time you're debating the con. And so it really taught me to have a broader perspective of issues and ask questions versus just make assumptions and assume that my side or my understanding of the issue is the only perspective.
Well, I think you bring out an important point, because I think a lot of people assume that debate, you're just choosing the issues that you want to debate. And the reality is the teacher says, oh, you're pro on this issue? Well, this time you're going to be against it.
Exactly. And in competitions, that's exactly what you did. You were constantly switching back and forth.
Wow. So you definitely had to research, you had to understand the issue, and you had to take the position that even though you might be against it, here's how I can win the argument.
Exactly. And actually went to state and won state one year. So yeah, it's a bit in my blood.
That is, to say the least. Well, when we were talking in my office, I said, how do you get from Grangeville, Idaho to the East Coast and George Mason? So that's the question. I mean, you're growing up in Idaho. You're active both in sports and in the community and on debate. Why not the West Coast? Why you go all the way to George Mason?
Well, actually, went to D.C. was my first stop before I ever landed at George Mason. So I was going into my junior year of college at the University of Idaho, did a 1-month internship for my congressman as part of my studies, because I was doing government politics. Came back to start my junior year, got a call saying we'd like you to come work full time.
Really?
Yeah. So
before you graduated? Before
I graduated. So much to my parents' chagrin, I packed up and moved 3,000 miles across country. And
how old were you?
I was 21.
Yeah, they had to kind of go, oh.
They're like, you need to finish college. I'm like, I'll finish college, but I'm not skipping out on this opportunity. So that's how I actually got to D.C. And so I spent a little over a year on the House side, and then about a year on the Senate side, did some work for a lobbying firm, but then went back and worked went back to school at George Mason University.
Did your parents encourage that independence with you and your siblings?
Very much so. Very much so, yeah. we were always taught to go. One, we could be anything we wanted to be. Hard work was essential. Keep humble, but don't be afraid to go try different things. Mm-hmm. So we were always told to go out and spread your wings.
So despite the fact that they're going, I can't believe she's gone 3,000 miles away and she hasn't finished her college degree, and oh my God, where's she going? They supported you.
They did. I mean, there was a hesitation there because education
absolutely.
was pretty big in our family. So there was the concern, but I knew in myself I was going to finish college. That wasn't ever an issue for me. It was just a matter of when I was going to go back and where. And so George Mason turned out to be where I landed.
Not a bad place to land.
No, I really enjoyed it. And I was living off campus, so I wasn't your traditional college student anymore. Mm-hmm. I was working full time. I went to school at night, so I wasn't going for the campus piece of it.
Yeah, you were going to get the sheepskin and say, okay, I've done that. Talk a little bit about that, though, because finishing up a college degree and you're working full time, and I'm going to bet working on a congressional staff is not necessarily an 8-to-5 job.
It's not. And it's not as fast-paced as working on a campaign. But on the House side, it's probably more fast-paced than it is on the Senate. Senate, very deliberate, a little bit slower, a little bit quieter. House was always a little bit rowdier, a little bit more action going on. But luckily I had who I was working for was very supportive. And so being able to leave work and go to classes at night was not really an issue in doing that. But there certainly wasn't a lot of free time.
Yeah. You mentioned campaigns. So you worked on the campaign side too for the Senate congressman? Or?
No, I actually moved to Nashville in '94 and went to work for Fred Thompson.
Oh, one of my favorite actors.
On his campaign. And so that's how I started I did fundraising for Fred.
How long did you work for Senator Thompson?
Well, I worked on his first campaign, and then he ran again in '96, and we shut down the campaign halfway through because he didn't have an opponent. So about not quite 2 years, worked with Fred on his campaign.
I should tell this story. I'm debating in my mind. When Senator Thompson was in office, that's when Tennessee was making their run to the national championship. And John Ward had announced that this would be his final year. So I'm a big Tennessee fan, and we were following the Vols, and their last game of the year was in Nashville. So we go to Nashville to watch the Vanderbilt game, and they're doing the Vol Network in Centennial Park, and one of the guests is Fred Thompson. Yeah, so we're walking to go see John Ward doing the Vol Network, and who comes walking right by me is Senator Thompson, and like any stupid, how old was I? 30 something. I looked at him and said, "Man, I loved you in Hunt for Red October." He kind of looked at me like, "What?"
He got that a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it was nothing unique. Oh God, I've never heard that before.
No, he was great to work for. That was a fun time. So learned a lot from Fred and just the campaign experience.
What kind of? So when you say you learned a lot from someone like Fred and those experiences, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Fred was very much, he knew where he stood on issues, mm-hmm. and he didn't let people sway him from that, which I admired. He also, political fundraising is not the most fun activity when you're running.
It's hard to ask people for money.
It's hard to ask people for money.
And you have to in order to survive.
And you have to. And he never wanted to feel like because he took a campaign contribution that he was beholden to anybody. So that was also a lesson learned from Fred. He was really mindful of that.
Yeah.
And so walking away from that with a lot of respect for how he handled the situation and how he held his ground on issues that other people were really surprised or wanted him to change his opinion on.
I moved to Tennessee when I was 8, and through that period, Tennessee has had a great reputation of reasonable politicians, much like Senator Thompson, who, okay, I know I got to raise money, I got to do that, but just because you give me money doesn't mean I'm seeing this issue this way or another. We were always a very consistent, middle-of-the-road, Howard Baker-esque type state.
Yep. Yeah, he was just like that. And he was his first campaign, for those that remember, was the red truck.
Oh, yeah.
So that was and that was really an idea that came from Fred of wanting to just get back to the roots and drive around in a pickup truck and get to know people.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to something, and it kind of relates back to your 1,500-yard playground. You climbed Grand Teton?
I did.
Talk about that.
I was much younger.
Yeah.
Much better shape. And probably from a life lesson experience, one of the bigger ones I've had, just because physically it takes a lot, but mentally it takes a lot.
How old were you?
I was 29.
And did you have to train ahead of time to do it? Or
I did. And back then I worked out a lot, much more than I do today. But remember, you're shifting altitudes. You're spending a night up at a camp, and then you get up at 3 a.m. and you get roped in and you put on a headlamp and you start climbing.
Wow.
And it's all a technical climb. So it's, but you're there at the top of the Grand when the sun comes up, and it's pretty amazing.
So when you're climbing up, is it almost a straight face climb where you're doing ropes and clicking in and doing all that stuff?
Yes.
Oh my God.
And I'll tell you, probably the most challenging was coming all the way back down on the same day.
Oh, wow.
So you get up there right before sunrise, and there's 2 different ways you can go up the Grand. You can do a 16 or an 8 pitch.
What's that mean?
That means how many times you rope in and tie into somebody and then climb. So it's just how many times you actually have to climb a different level with other people tied into you.
Let me get this straight. And I'm sorry, because I got an aversion to heights. And my youngest daughter and you would get along great because she does this stuff. You're climbing and you got to clip in, but you're also connected to someone.
Yep.
So every time you move, you got to take that hook and click into the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a camera. Take a picture for you.
Well, and that's what I kind of mean by it's the mental. And at that point in my life, I needed a good mental challenge. And that was definitely a mental challenge because it's fatigue-wise, it's tiring. Yeah. But you have to mentally prepare yourself to get through that.
So you said you were in your late 20s. So
Mm-hmm.
you've obviously graduated from college. You're coming off the congressional stuff. Were you in between where you just wanted to do something different?
Yeah, I had just spent 3 years with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, traveling back and forth because at this point I was living in Knoxville. So I'd moved from Nashville to Knoxville. That was 3 years of going back and forth, working for the commissioner at the time. And so it was one of those detox. Yeah. I need to do something different kind of things. And so great experience.
Would you recommend that to someone who needs to, or something like that?
I would recommend people who are kind of at a crossroads.
Yeah.
To think about doing something that maybe pushes you outside of your normal comfort zone.
What did doing that teach you? What did it push you?
Well, it taught me, or at least it reminded me, maybe it didn't teach me, it reminded me of my own strength and my ability to do something if I put my mind to it. And that I can pretty much get through anything. I mean, You're going to hit some hard times. You're going to have to figure some things out. But if you can push through that, you can push through a lot of things.
Well, and I'm so glad you said that because, I'll talk about my youngest daughter again because she does a lot of that stuff. She's a glacier guide in Alaska. Okay. She does that kind of thing. And she's not even 30. And I look back to my late 20s, and it was nothing like that. It was, this is the right thing you're supposed to do. This is how you stay on track. Oh, what do you mean you're going to take 6 weeks and, figure something out? It just didn't happen for me. Yeah. But it was a different time too. I think today a lot of people recognized that you need to do those things while you can.
Yeah, whether it's 3 days in my case or 6 months or 6 weeks, it's good to kind of step away and get some clarity, which is what it provided.
Yeah. So I wanted, because I try and do this very linearly.
Yeah.
So after Grand Teton, take us through your career path. You'll leave, you go do the Grand Teton thing, or well, maybe even before that, because I want to get to how you got into Tennessee through Senator Thompson. What was after Senator Thompson?
Well, after Senator Thompson was 3 years at the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, and the commissioner at the time was Bill Baxter, and so I actually followed Bill, which is how I got to TVA. So
he was on the board.
He was when we had a 3-member board. He was put on the board, and so that's how I actually got to TVA in 2001.
I think I remember him. Glasses, kind of bubbly.
Yeah. And so that's how I got there, and this past November, I just wrapped up 24 years, which I would have never imagined I would be at TVA for 24 years. But
congratulations.
Thank you. It's been an incredible career, and anything but linear.
Yeah. So you go work for the Tennessee Department of Economic Development. What were the big wins at that time, or do you remember?
Oh, gosh. Nissan.
That's a pretty big win.
That was a big win. There were several, and you're going to stretch my memory on them. But there were several over that 3-year period that were pretty notable for Tennessee. And it was like I said, my career's been anything but linear.
Yeah.
So starting off, getting a degree in politics, finding myself at the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, learning about economic development and all the ins and outs that go into that, developing relationships, broadening your network, all of that has got me, I think, to where I am today.
Well, you just hit every key point we like in this podcast, so we're done. No career's linear; they all got ups and downs, and I'm not doing what I went to school for.
Not at all. TVA's been a really interesting career. I came in with Baxter, but quickly moved into the government side.
Yeah.
And did that for 5 years.
And that's where your degree came in.
And that's what I thought I loved and I did enjoy it at the time, but I was also in my mind thinking that from a career path, I thought that's all I could really do.
Yeah.
And so it really took a leader at TVA who called me up one day and said, I want you to come work in river operations.
What did you think of that?
Well, literally my first response was, Janet, I'm not an engineer. I don't have anything to offer you.
Yeah.
And her response, without missing a beat, was, I have engineers. I don't need another engineer. I need somebody who thinks differently than an engineer. And that was really my first big wake-up call when it came to my career of I was kind of pigeonholing myself based on a degree that I had and things I had done in the past. And so I took another leap of faith and moved into the operation side of TVA and spent 13 years managing various aspects of our operation side of the house.
And I want to get to those specifics, but I want to go back to the degree. Back when you're in Grangeville, Idaho, and you're going to Idaho and you're studying. Did you ever think you'd end up in Tennessee working for TVA? I mean,
oh goodness, no. Moving across the country
and what
never
was
crossed
the goal
my mind.
when you were in Idaho? When you were a kid, that high school kid, what were you thinking you were going to do?
Honestly, my plan was to become an attorney.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And I'm one of those that, which is why the climbing the Grand was a little bit out of my comfort zone, because I'm a planner. Everything's got to be planned and everything has a place. And I had planned out, I'll go to University of Idaho, I'll get my degree, I'll go on, I'll do my 3 years at law school, I'll become an attorney. But I was always interested in politics, and government, probably more so than politics. Politics comes and goes, but I really love the government side. So to think I'm here today, like I said, is not at all what I had planned.
Well, how uncomfortable is that for a planner? Because you've, and I would imagine as you were a kid growing up, you were probably the high school kid who knew I'm going to do this, this, and this, and all of a sudden, and you said the word a little bit in our conversation, relationships. So it takes you off your plan. Did you find that difficult to cope with, or did you just kind of let it go and say, okay, maybe this is the new plan?
It really wasn't hard for me to take the shift. Once I was in D.C., that first time for an internship, I just fell in love with it. And I've always been a bit adventurous. Even though I'm a planner, I'm still a bit adventurous. And so it really didn't take me long to say yes to going to D.C., but I still didn't know what I wanted to do. So the law thing was out the door. And what do you do with a government and politics degree?
Well, I'm going to get. I got to pick on my youngest daughter one more time. So a lot of people will say to me, "A glacier guide. How does one become a glacier guide?" And I say, "Well, you go to Swanee and you major in politics because that's what she did."
Exactly. It is. I won't say it's a useless degree, but you do go, okay. Where do you? I mean, it's not like you're saying I'm going to be a civil engineer or I'm going to be a tax attorney or whatever. It's pretty broad. And so what I have truly loved about my career, though, is it hasn't been based on a degree. It's been based on these incredible opportunities that have come my way that I've been able to take advantage of and learn a ton. So,
well, I think you bring up a great point there because it's like a liberal arts degree. I'm going to be an accountant, so I got an accounting degree. I'm going to be a lawyer, so I got a law degree. And I was a journalism communications major, and a lot of people are like, well, what are you going to do with a communications degree? That doesn't do anything for you. And what I've found, and I think it's true with a lot of degrees, it's not everyone needs good communication skills. You've got to be able to speak. You got to be able to write. You got to be able to express yourself. So it gives you those skills, and I'm sure it's true with government and politics that there's aspects of it that come in. And one of the things I like to emphasize when we talk to folks about their careers, for other people to learn, is that you don't need to get pigeonholed by your degree. There's lots of opportunities out there.
Yeah, I get a chance to talk to a lot of people at TVA, younger people. And that's one of the first things I tell them, based on my own experience because if I hadn't had that first person to say, why are you limiting yourself? Your skills are completely transferable. You're just not seeing that. And so I always tell people, your degree is great, but think about your skill sets and what's transferable in your skill sets that you can apply to any job.
And a lot of times people have a hard time recognizing that, and it's usually some type of mentor who helps point it out to them, someone who says, look, you're not looking at this right. Did you have mentors along the way, particularly at TVA?
I did. Janet was the first one, and I've had several since. There's really two people in TVA in particular who've been impactful, who have taken me out of my comfort zone. Because the second individual I was working in river ops, and he was managing the Kingston Asheville, and he called me up one day and said, I've got a job to offer you. I want you to go run the Kingston project.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
But again, one of those leaders who believes he sees something in people and sees their skill sets and figures out that that's the skill set I need, because I've got all the other skill sets. I got the technical. I need somebody who can bring it all together.
Well, and it's not like that wasn't a high-profile project.
No, not at all.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because obviously it was a tragedy.
It was.
And huge implications. Mm-hmm. And he calls you and says, I want you to lead this. There's got to be a little bit of pressure on you.
There's a little. So I will say when I came in was not right after it happened. So when I came in, so the spill happened at the end of 2008. I came in 2013 with the job to close down the project. Yeah. So finish it out. So still big. Yeah. Still a lot of eyes on it. But it's one of those, again, I mean, every turn I've taken at TVA, I've learned. Yeah. And I've also been able to apply my own skill sets and knowledge to the job. So, yeah, you learn a lot. If you're willing to ask questions and truly listen for understanding, you can learn a lot from people, because we had a lot of incredible people working on that project.
As you know, we've talked to a number of people from TVA, and TVA is a sponsor of this podcast. And what I've heard from every one of them, including yourself, is that culture of learning and doing something different and taking a chance. Why is that, or how is that so ingrained at TVA? Was that the result of one of the leaders doing that, or is that just in the culture?
I'd say it's in the culture, but I'd say you've had some leaders over the years who have really found value in moving people around the company. It's a big company.
Yeah.
We're in 7 states. We got over 10,000 employees. So being able to understand the breadth and depth of the company is hard to do if you just stay in one area all the time. Now, obviously, we need some people who are subject matter experts to do that. But then there are people like me who can move around the company and learn and again, broaden that breadth and depth of their understanding, but also bring to whatever area you're working in your own perspective and skill sets. And so it's something we encourage a lot at TVA is for people to go work in other parts of the company.
So the executives, the managers, it's in the culture to where they go, you know what? I see these skills, even though Carol's a government and politics major, we're going to put her in charge of the river region.
Exactly.
So when you walk into something like that, okay, I'm a government and politics major, I'm going to go learn all about rivers. Do you start to bone up on that?
Yeah, my nature is if I'm given something new, I dive in 110%.
Yeah.
And I probably don't come up for air for the first 6 months. I don't like not knowing. So, but I also recognize I'm also not an engineer, so my job isn't to understand all the ins and outs of everything. But I do want to understand, and TVA for me is fascinating because there's so many aspects to TVA. So you can spend your entire career going around the company and still not learn everything.
What are some of those aspects?
Oh gosh, I mean, we do so much. I mean, you've got engineers who are managing an integrated river system. You've got people who are managing the third largest transmission system. You've got people who are managing a nuclear site. You've got folks managing coal and gas sites. You've got people out doing natural resource management. So it's incredible the reach that TVA has when it comes to our impact in this area and the opportunities people have within TVA.
And I think that's something that people have forgotten about. And I go back to when we moved to Tennessee in 1970 in my 3rd grade class. We watched a film called TVA Electrifies the Valley. And it was an old black and white academic film, and they're talking about how TVA brought electricity. And that's frankly the way most people think of TVA. But it really is a lot more than that.
It's a lot more than that. I mean, it's certainly a power generation company, but we also manage the 5th largest river system, which people don't think about. We have campgrounds. We have shorelines that we protect. We have 293,000 acres, public acres, land that we manage. So
well, and there's not a economic development project that comes into anywhere in your region that TVA is not involved with.
Exactly.
Would that be correct?
That would be correct. We are involved closely and work closely with the states, with the local communities, with our local power companies, on all of those economic development opportunities.
So your time with the state had to help you with that?
A little. And I mean, we've got an incredible group of people that lead our economic development efforts. So I don't necessarily play in that arena, but I have an understanding of it, which is helpful.
You need to do.
Yeah. So
talk a little bit about being the regional executive, because I see that kind of as you've got to know every aspect of TVA because you're relating to not just different clients, different constituencies. It's almost like being a politician, isn't it?
A little bit.
I didn't mean to insult you.
It's when I started at TVA and I came in and jumped into government relations for TVA, I actually had the East region. And then 3 years ago now, when I was asked to go lead the East region, broaden that circle to include our local power companies that are in this area, as well as government and community leaders at the state and local level. And you do have to know a little bit about everything that's going on, but you've also got these incredible resources at TVA that you can call on that, and again, these people who are so knowledgeable that you can bring in to help support you and provide information, and also go out and talk to folks and help answer questions and educate folks around issues that TVA is facing, how we're supporting the region. So I loved that job. And we still got a great group of people out there doing that all across the valley.
When you moved into that job, did you sit back and go, now I'm using my degree?
Now I'm using my degree. Yeah. You know, what's odd is, so I'm an introvert by nature. And yet my entire career has been...
Yeah, you've been public-facing.
Yeah, public-facing roles, which I've loved. But I'm also one of those, at the end of the day, there's a little bit of, I need some quiet time to go regroup. But yeah, that was a great job because I had been internal for so long, for 13 years, doing operational work, and then shifting back, going back out in the communities, building relationships, making connections with people. I forgot how much I enjoyed that part of it.
Well, you're good at it too.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned you need some quiet time. What do you do for that quiet time? What do you do to unwind?
I will go for a walk. I will read a book. I will cook. Sometimes I'll just sit quietly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can be, I can go for a hike. So I love to be outside. So hiking is one of my favorite things to do. Are
you still climbing?
I'm not climbing. No.
One and done?
One and done. Exactly. Kind of like George Mason. But yeah, so anytime I can being alone in nature is how I recharge my batteries, or I can even just 5 minutes and I'm okay.
And I'm sure that goes back to being a kid.
Yeah. Wide open spaces are something I value.
Are you and your siblings close in age?
We are. We're all about 2.5 years apart.
So was that your main play group, or were there enough people around that...
Yeah, I mean, when I was little, like before I got into going to school, yes. But again, small community. I had my close group of friends, just like my siblings had their friends that we did things with. I just wasn't always in town. And so, it was, nope, we're home and we're not going back into town. So...
Well, and that's when you know you're rural, when people say, well, we got to go into town.
Yeah, 6 miles. Now you're like, it's 6 miles.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We call that Ultiwata downtown.
Yeah. What you appreciate now is, you had two parents who were working and they're like, yeah, we've been working all day and we just got home. We're really not interested in turning around and dropping you off in town. So yeah, they were very happy when I got my driver's license.
Well, and it gives you that freedom too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when they came to you and said, okay, we will make you the vice president of human resources, did you say, I've got nothing to offer you because I'm not an HR person?
I learned my lesson on that one.
Yeah.
But I did jokingly say, are you calling the right Carol? That was not on my radar.
Yeah, I bet.
And so it took me a while to wrap my head around that one. But I could tell I was going to enjoy it because the minute it was offered, there was the excitement of human resources affects every part of the company, right? We had some challenges, as someone who'd worked at TVA a long time, had a lot of interactions with HR. We have a lot of great people in the company working in HR. But, HR is one of those, it's a little bit loved, it's a little bit hated. But I also love a good challenge. So I was excited by the opportunity to, one, learn more about HR. So what's really behind the curtain? I know what I see, but I also am smart enough to realize there's more to it than what I'm experiencing. And so being able to go in and really learn about their side and what they go through.
The HR professionals.
The HR professionals. And all of the ways in which they support the company. Which I think often, if you're not in it, you don't necessarily have the appreciation for it. And it's easy to stand on the outside and throw rocks. And I was one of those that threw rocks. And so you get into it and it comes back to that debating thing of there is another side to this.
That's a great point.
And they have their own challenges. And it's not as easy as it looks.
And just in terms of what HR does and how people just see them in one way. And I'm going to give you some assumptions of someone who's never worked in HR. I think the fear, because there are fears of HR, the fear of HR on the person who's just working in the company is, oh God, you got to go to HR. You're either in trouble or you screwed up something on your health benefits or something like that. But HR's responsibility is also culture, isn't it?
It's culture. And really, I think we sometimes underestimate not just TVA, but I think a lot of companies underestimate the importance of culture and how it influences your ability to not only attract but retain.
Yeah.
And how quickly one thing can really just take off like fire across a company. And it can do a lot of damage or it can do a lot of good depending on what it is.
Yeah. Well, and that's where that communication aspect comes in because what I used to like to tell people when I was running TV stations was, I'm going to tell you everything I can, because the last thing I wanted was what I called parking lot talk, which was when you're leaving at the end of the day and you see 3 or 4 associates in the parking lot going, can you believe Mike? He's such a... and unless everyone has all the pertinent information, the mind will take you somewhere that you're going, how in the world did you come up with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're not going to tell your story, somebody else will tell it for you.
Great point.
But yeah, HR has been a huge learning experience, one I'm still enjoying. I've only been at it since April of last year, but it's really integral to what the company does on a day-to-day basis, and I have a much greater appreciation for that today than I did when I started.
You know, you've called yourself an introvert a couple of times, and as you said, most of your jobs have been public-facing, and I know you through those jobs. I can see the introvert, but I wouldn't call you an introvert. I would say you have introvert tendencies, but you do work very hard to build relationships and be out there. How difficult was that for you?
The relationships is not difficult. I enjoy getting to know people and meeting people and learning about other people. I will tell you the small chit chat, going to receptions was always a bit of a struggle for me.
When you walk in, you got the name tag on and you're like, oh gosh, now I've got to dive in.
Let's talk about the weather. No, let's not talk about the weather. So I prefer connecting with people. And so some of those activities I always found a little bit tiresome. Connecting with people I actually enjoy. It's, but I think from an introvert standpoint, it's one of those things where, you can also be underestimated because I tend to be quiet as well in certain circumstances. And so that can also be a little bit, for people who aren't introverts, either they don't understand what we're talking about or they shouldn't really be at the table. And so you can easily be overlooked if you're not careful.
I got a couple more questions for you before we run out of time. But before I do get to those, I do want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible. And I would bet you know who makes this possible. It's the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I do want to thank TVA for sponsoring My Morning Cup. You can follow TVA on social media to learn more about the multifaceted mission of service. And you can visit tva.com/do good here to explore exciting career opportunities at TVA. So if you had heard that line when you were a kid in Grangeville, Idaho, would you have said, I got to find a way to TVA?
No, because I'll tell you, in the history books where I came from, I think it was about a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs on the New Deal with a reference to TVA. And today's probably not much better, quite honestly, in the school system. So no, it wouldn't have resonated with me.
And that goes back to, if you're not telling your story, who is? Yeah. Because think about the impact of TVA. In Tennessee's history books, because we had to take Tennessee history, I think, in 5th grade, there was a good bit on TVA in there. Okay. But to your point, most of the country really doesn't understand. They just see for what they hear in the news. Yeah.
And even, if you think about the population growth that's happened in the Southeast and just in Chattanooga, in our surrounding area, you got a lot of new people moving in who have no experience with TVA. And so when you say TVA, you have to really stop to talk about what does TVA mean? Because people might say, well, is that the credit union?
Yes.
What is TVA? And I'm not familiar at all with TVA. And so we're continually working on how we tell our story.
Yeah.
So that it does, people not only just understand the impact TVA has had, but you also energize people around what we're continuing to do and what this future looks like in the energy industry. So,
which is a big topic right now.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, because transitioning from coal is a big thing, and now you got a new administration that says, well, not so fast.
Not so fast. Yeah, so that'll put an interesting spin on everything for the entire industry.
So you've got, at least you got job security. You got some work ahead.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about it.
There you go.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've got one last question for you. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Yeah, so many things. But I think at the top of the list, it would be know your self-worth. It's every day I read a quote just to ground myself and reaffirm my own self-worth, which is don't cross oceans for people who wouldn't jump puddles for you.
Oh, I like that.
Every morning I read that to myself to remind myself of my own self-worth, because I think it's really important. When you're young, it's really hard to understand when to walk away from a table or who you should let sit at your table. And I think that's part of because we don't spend a lot of time thinking about what is our self-worth and building up that confidence. So
who's that quote from? Do you know?
I'd have to go back and look because I don't pay attention usually to
unknown.
who's quoting.
Don't jump over oceans to people who
don't cross the ocean.
Don't cross oceans
for people who won't jump puddles.
That's a great point. One of the things I do every night, I read the Daily Stoic. So it's very much that message of just reject negativism from your life. You don't need that.
You don't need it.
What do you care what people think?
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing.
Exactly.
Anything else? I interrupted you on that. So you said there were a lot of things.
No.
And we got hours left.
I think that would be probably the first thing I would tell my 25-year-old self.
Yeah.
And what I would tell any young person.
Well, and I think that's such an important message, but it's also at that age hard to absorb that because you're growing, you're building your career, you want people to like you, and so you tend to bend over backwards to get people like you. And then when you get my age in your 60s, you go, that was a waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I would tell myself is, and it kind of goes to the point you're talking about, is when you know your self-worth, you're also less likely to compromise your ethics. And so,
and that's so important today.
Yeah, very important. And I think important at every stage of your life. So the sooner you can figure that out, I think the better off you are.
Well, and to tie that back into a happy life, it's a lot easier when you do get to a certain age to look back and know that you didn't compromise than to think, I'm really not proud of myself in that situation.
Exactly.
And I think an important note on that is that not compromising doesn't mean that things are going to be easy for you.
Exactly.
There are consequences to standing your ground, and it can make life difficult, but if you did the right thing, it makes it easier in terms of...
It makes it easier.
Yeah.
And to your point, when you look back, you'll be proud of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, Carol, I really enjoyed the conversation. I always enjoy being with you.
Thank you.
I don't think you're much of an introvert. I'm gonna have the introvert club give you a call and rescind your card.
Thank you. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on. This has been fun.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.